I love it when engine builders are willing to invest in R&D and let me tag along. Today, we're at the shops of Prestige Motorsports, and as you can see, they're working on some power packages for the Gen 3 Hemi. And we wanted to see if the OEM cylinder heads can stand up to Edelbrock's new Gen 3 Hemi cylinder heads. Hang on, it's dyno time. Although the second gen Hemi has been hot rodded forever, the Gen 3 hasn't really caught on yet, but we're willing to bet that's about to change. More manufacturers like Holley and Edelbrock are starting to produce performance parts for the engine platform to squeeze out more power and make working with them easier. During a recent junkyard hunt, I took a quick survey of what Hemis I could find. The Dodge Hellcat and other supercharged versions have made the Hemi much more popular. And with the aftermarket stepping up with performance parts, the last thing that's needed to complete the holy trifecta is to have a decent inventory of used engines out in the wild that can be picked up on the cheap. Let's see what we have here. The problem is the larger 6.2 and 6.4 engines rarely last long in the junkyard. It's got, looks like it's got both the heads in place. This one might be a candidate. But you can find the smaller 5.7 liter in several different models. Here's an 06 Jeep Commander, and it's also got the 5.7 in it. Let's see if we can see it here. Out of the way, baby. They've pulled the valve covers and the intake manifold, but left the heads on it. Another issue is early heads would want to drop a valve seat, which is why you'll often find engines with a missing cylinder head, like this 07 Jeep Commander, because somebody has yanked the head to replace a bad one. And there are much better options out there than to bother with this mess. This 06 Dodge Magnum also showed no wreck damage, so we have to suspect engine issues sent it to the junkyard. Regardless, most everything is still there, and if you're going to do a stroker, which really wakes up the 5.7 engine, a little machine work on the block isn't too big a deal. Anyhow, you get the idea. Prestige's build starts with a stock 5.7 Hemi that's in much better shape than anything I found. About the only major components they'll be keeping will be the block, front cover, cylinder heads for the test, and a few other odds and ends. There's a lot more going on with this engine than just the cylinder head test we're here for. This is actually the first of many trials planned as Prestige pushes to see how far they can take the Gen 3 Hemi. I'll let Doug Aiken of Prestige explain it a little bit better.
Well, welcome back to Prestige Motorsports. In the dyno room today, we're working with the Gen 3 Hemi platform. So for those of you that watch our stuff, we do a ton of Gen 2 Hemis, boosted or just your street car stuff, and we're rolling into a lot of testing and development in our Gen 3 platform. So this, we've done a test from basically a factory head to the Edelbrock head, and furthermore, the short block, basically this starts as a 5.7 Hemi, but we have bored it and stroked it. So really what we've tested is the stroke combination along with a mild camshaft upgrade, and we're really pleased with the results that we've seen so far.
Even though this isn't a full engine build video, we need to take a second to go over the components chosen before we get to the dyno. First, Prestige fully machined and blueprinted the stock block before beginning the build. The crank is an Eagle stroker that will swing the pistons 4 inches 50 thousandths in the bores. The stock stroke, by the way, is 3 inches 500 thousandths. Along with a 3.927 inch bore, that makes total displacement 392 cubic inches, or 6.4 liters. But just because this is a 6.4 liter engine, it isn't a clone of the Mopar 6.4. Namely, Prestige is doing this with stroke, while the Mopar version has a larger bore but shorter stroke. The more modern 6.4 also has much more advanced heads than the stock 5.7 heads we're using as a baseline. Apparently, this is an early, pre-2009 version of the Gen 3 block. It has the multi-displacement system, Chrysler calls it MDS, which can shut down 2 cylinders during part throttle cruising, but it isn't equipped with variable valve timing. Needless to say, Prestige will disable the MDS system, so all 8 cylinders will be running all the time. The rotating assembly is made up of a set of Eagle ESP H-beam connecting rods and DSS Racing forged pistons. The The forged connecting rods are 6 1/8 inches long with a 2-inch big end and Chevy size .927-inch wrist pin. The DSS pistons are custom forgings to prestigious specs. They have an 8cc dome, and with the slipper skirt design means the normally heavy Hemi piston weighs in at just 438 grams without the pin. Prestige chose a relatively mild cam because they're trying to determine what works best in a street setup, not what's best for an all-out race car. Those are two very different scenarios. The cam is a hydraulic roller from Comp Cams with 230 and 240 degrees of duration at 50 thousandths tappet lift and a wide 113 degree lobe separation. Lobe lift is 366 thousandths for the intakes and 362 thousandths for the exhaust. So with the stock 1.64 ratio rocker arms, that comes out to 603 thousandths lift for the intakes and 597 for the exhaust. The intake manifold is one of Holley's new Sniper EFI sheet metal fabricated intakes. They're fully TIG welded, have thick 1 1/8 inch flanges that bolt up to the heads, and Holley says they work best from 1800 to 6400 RPM. Mated up to that is a 92mm cable-driven Sniper throttle body. The stock coils have been swapped out for a set from MSD, and the injectors are 48 pound-per-hour units, good for up to 760 horsepower. They're all controlled by a Holley Terminator X ECU and wiring harness. Both cylinder heads will exhaust through a set of 1 7/8" Hooker long tube headers. First up will be the stock heads. These are the standard 5.7 liter heads that ran from 2003 until 2008 or 9. And they're not to be confused with the upgraded Eagle cylinder heads that Chrysler brought out with the variable valve timing version of the Hemi in 2009. The Eagle heads are nice, but they're also much more difficult to find. Anyhow, these heads are still very well designed. Most noticeably, they aren't a true hemispherical chamber. Chrysler's engineers added what they call squish shelves on either side of the chambers that makes it more of an oval. The valves are sized at 2 inches even for the intakes and 1 inch 550 thousandths for the exhaust. The chambers are 83 cubic centimeters and the intake port volume is 161 cc's. Even with the long stroke, the compression ratio will still be a manageable 10.9 to 1. Up top, Prestige needed a spring setup that can handle the 600 thousandths valve lift without going into coil bind. For these heads, they chose a set of beehive valve springs with a small retainer made from steel. Nothing too fancy, but more than enough to do the job. So we've got the cylinder heads bolted up and it's time to go. After a little tuning and break-in time, we will make our first baseline pull of the original head. On the dyno, the OEM heads did well on the stroke or short block. For reference, the original 5.7 Gen 3 Hemi was worth 375 foot-pounds of torque and 345 horsepower. With the same heads, Prestige's stroker produced 463.3 foot-pounds of torque at 4,700 RPM and nearly broke the 500 mark with 496.5 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. That's not shabby at all, but horsepower is a lot like ice cream. More is always better. So let's see what we can do about that. But first, I wanted to show you one more metric. The dyno also logged the amount of air the engine ingested in terms of cubic feet per minute. It's metered by the hat on top of the intake tube. So let's take a look at that. The scale for the airflow is on the right side of the graph. By 6,300 RPM when Senior pulled the handle, it was moving 687.4 CFM. That doesn't tell us much yet. but it will be interesting when we can compare it to what the Edelbrock heads do. Once he figured he had the best numbers he was going to get with the OEM cylinder heads, Prestige's Senior started the process of the cylinder head swap. And while he's doing that, let's take a look at Edelbrock's RPM Gen 3 Hemi cylinder head. This is a direct fit head and will work on any intake and exhaust that'll bolt to a stock engine. Like the OEM head, Edelbrock's CNC cut combustion chambers are also 83 cc's, so the compression ratio will stay the same. But the chamber shape differs quite a bit. I'll put up a shot of the old chamber side by side for comparison. Notice that the squish shelves aren't nearly as pronounced in the combustion chambers. Both use 2 spark plugs per cylinder to produce a faster flame front and more efficient combustion. But the Edelbrock heads are outfitted with larger valves. The intakes are 2 inches 165 thousandths in diameter, while the exhausts are 1 inch 650 thousandths. The intake port is also larger at 202 cc's. Unlike the combustion chambers, the ports are left as cast, but they really look pretty nice. They also offer more choices when it comes to the combustion chamber size, with 73 and 67 cc versions to go along with our 83s. And one quick note, these aren't the valve springs the heads came with. Prestige wanted to push the heads a little harder, so they upgraded the valve springs to a double nested set that's just a little bit stronger than stock. The new heads are secured to the block using the same ARP head studs. At 12 millimeters, they're torqued to 105 foot-pounds each. We're also using the same stock shaft mount rocker arm system. And then everything else bolts right back up just like before. Sounds pretty good, but let's see how it actually did on the dyno graph. The Edelbrock heads lagged just a bit up to 4,700 RPM, but then boy, did they take off. Peak power was 479.6 foot-pounds of torque at 5,600 RPM, and then it blew right past that 500 horsepower line we struggled to hit before with 556.3 horsepower at 6,400. Notice that we had to extend the run to 6,600 RPM because these heads flow air so much better. That works out to an improvement of 16.3 foot-pounds of torque and an impressive 59.8 horsepower. That's a healthy uptick in power all the way through the upper end of the RPM range. Also, you'll notice that the power starts falling off pretty sharply after 6,500 RPM. This may be a sign that the valve springs lost control of the valves. Stronger springs may help, but the way the stock Hemi rocker shaft locates to the head limits valve spring choices. Now, let's take a look at the airflow moving through the engine in the new heads. The airflow pattern matches the power production as it should. It appears that the smaller ports in the OEM cylinder heads help improve velocity through the ports in the lower RPM range. But the larger port design in the Edelbrock heads really take over at 5,100 RPM, and the OEM head just can't keep up after that. Honestly, I think I'd happily give up the small losses on the bottom end to take those big gains up top. We're talking about a difference of about 8 to 10 foot-pounds of torque on the bottom end. But then up top, the Edelbrock cylinder heads really shine. They're better by 35 foot-pounds of torque or more and between 50 and 60 horsepower. That is particularly impressive considering that the cam is pretty street-oriented and not all that aggressive. If we went with a bigger cam, the differences would probably be even more dramatic. But that's a dyno test for another day. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.